Chapter 5, Profit Maximization. In this video, we're going to talk about how a business determines how many units to produce in order to maximize their profit. And this is probably the most important part of this entire video series. Profit maximization is the quantity where your marginal revenue will equal your marginal cost. Now, follow along with me because this seems weird. Marginal revenue is the amount of money I make when I sell one more product, and marginal cost is the amount it would cost me to make one more product. So if marginal revenue equals marginal cost, then I'm not making any profit. But we're looking at the quantity here, where our marginal revenue equals marginal cost. All of the quantities leading up to this point, your revenue was higher than your cost. So every single unit, you were making more and more total profit. Remember that marginal revenue is the money that you make when you sell that particular unit, and marginal revenue is the same as price in a competitive market. Because in a competitive market, everybody sells the product at the same price because everybody's a price taker. There are so many buyers and sellers that no seller can control their price, or all of their customers will just go buy from somebody else. So your marginal revenue is going to be the price you sell the good at. And marginal cost, of course, is the amount of money it took you to make that particular product. So you want to find out how many units or quantity you will need to make in order to maximize your firm's profit. If your marginal revenue is higher than your marginal cost, then you still have some room to make more units to raise your profit. And if marginal revenue suddenly becomes lower than your marginal cost, then you'd be losing money when you produce that unit. So you don't want to do that. Remember, breaking even on one unit is still better than losing money. And even if you're breaking even on one unit, you have made more total profit looking at all of the units you've made up until that point. Now, here's a graph. This is a graph we haven't seen yet, so it looks a little funny. The vertical axis is still price or cost in this instance, and the horizontal axis is still quantity or how many units you're making. Your marginal cost line is going to be the same thing as your supply line. It's upward sloping, and this reflects the costs it takes to make one more unit. In a competitive market where you have lots of buyers and sellers, your price is your same thing as your marginal revenue, which is why the red line is labeled both price and MR. But it is also a perfectly elastic demand line. So that price line and MR line is also demand. So the point at which your price and marginal revenue intersect with marginal cost, that is the same as your equilibrium on a supply and demand graph. So here, if I produce at this point where my MR line and my MC line intersect, if I make that particular quantity, if I follow it all the way down to the bottom, that's the quantity where I'm going to maximize my total profits. And my total profits are going to be everything higher than my average total cost line. So this particular box here is going to be the profit. And the box's entire area is the total profits I'm making on all of these possible units. If I multiplied price times quantity, I'd get a much larger box, and that would be the revenue it took me to make the product. If I look at the quantity and the average total cost, so the white box at the bottom, that's my total cost it took me to make that particular set of units all the way up until my profit maximizing quantity. So this particular area, price minus my average total cost, also will tell me my profit per unit. I, of course, can multiply that by the quantity in order to get total profits. So here's an example of a firm that's not making profits. If my demand line, or in this case, the price marginal revenue line, has decreased, demand shifts downward, and now my demand line is lower than my cost. So the price that I'm selling my goods at is lower than what it costs me to make it. So The place where I can minimize my losses and lose the least amount of money is where MR equals MC. So I find where MR equals MC and I go down to quantity. That's the amount of quantity I want to make in order to make my losses as few as possible. Now, the average total cost line is going to tell me how much total cost it takes for me to make all of those units up until that point. So here, my total cost line is above my price and marginal revenue line. That's how I know I have a loss. You can, of course, find the area of that entire orange box, which is the difference between average total cost and price times quantity. And that's my loss per unit. You can multiply that by the quantity to get total losses on all of the units leading up to that point.